All right, back to the streams. Back to the streams. We are right now in the beautiful lobby, the beautiful, expansive lobby of NS, and let's look into where we ended. We ended right over here. On the other hand, artificial education is having one set cram full of ideas derived from hearing, others talk. From learning and reading before one has anything like an extensive knowledge of the world as it is, as one sees it. The observations which produce all these ideas are said to come later on with experience. Which produce all these ideas are said to come later on. Are said to come later on with experience, but until then, these ideas are applied wrongly, and accordingly, both things are and men are judged wrongly, seen wrongly, and treated wrongly. And so it is that education perverts the mind, and this is why, after a long spell of learning and reading, we enter the world in our youth with views that are partly simple, partly perverted. Consequently, we comport ourselves with an air of anxiety at one time, at another of presumption. This is because our head is full of ideas which we are now trying to make use of, but almost always apply wrongly. I think this is also very interesting. Most of the time, we don't even know. We don't know. We have always remembered very partial ideas, and even if we remember the right idea, even if we remember the right quote, the right idea, we are interpreting it in the wrong way. We are interpreting it in an incredibly wrong way, and that is another big problem that we face. By the way, I'm also really enjoying my barefoot era. Barefoot means that you are literally walking around in these room slippers, these room towel slippers all around, and it's pretty good. It's pretty good. I think we made all these fancy shoes, which make it actually harder for us to stand for long periods of time. But what we ideally always wanted, the barefoot design is actually perfect. The barefoot design is actually perfect. What we want is just protection from stone, protection from heat, all of that stuff. But the barefoot design is perfect. So wearing these room slippers, these hotel room slippers, is actually amazing. It's amazing. Okay. We comport ourselves with an air of anxiety at one time, at another of presumption. This is because our head is full of ideas which we are now trying to make use of, but almost always apply wrongly. This is a result of putting the cart before the horse, since we are directly opposing the natural development of our mind by obtaining ideas first and observations last. For teachers, instead of developing in a boy his faculties of discernment, judgment, and of thinking for himself, really tries to stuff his head full of other people's thoughts. Discernment and judgment, his faculties of discernment and judgment, and of thinking for himself, merely strive to stuff his head full of other people's thoughts. Subsequently, all the opinions that have sprung from misapplied ideas have to be rectified by lengthy experience, and it is seldom that they are completely rectified. This is why so few men of learning have such sound common sense, as is quite common among the illiterate. It's also very interesting. I would sit in these conferences, and maybe there was a time when you sit in these conferences and you learn something interesting, but now these conferences feel boring and a waste of time because you're just sitting there. You're sitting and you are consuming information which is very low density. It's very low density. It's not even relevant to what you want. So there's no point of sitting in these conferences. It's great for meeting people. So you can go in, you can meet all the right people, and then you can come back. But it's incredibly important. It's incredibly important that you focus on self-learning, you focus on autonomy, you focus on doing the things that you truly want, and you have a sort of autonomy, you have a sense of autonomy that, okay, I am choosing to do this, and that makes the learning process actually enjoyable, actually something that you are absorbing and learning and engaging with. This is why so few men of learning have such good common sense, as is quite common among the illiterate. From what has been said, the principal point in education is that one's knowledge of the world begins at the right end. One's knowledge of the world begins at the right end, and the attainment of which might be designated as the aim of all education. From what has been said, the principal point in education is that one's knowledge of the world begins at the right end, and the attainment of which might be designated as the aim of all education. But, as has been pointed out, this depends principally on the observation of each thing preceding the idea one forms of it. Further, the narrow ideas proceed broader, so that the whole of one's instruction is given in the order that the ideas themselves during formation must have followed. But directly this order is not strictly adhered to. Imperfect and subsequently wrong ideas spring up, and finally there arises a perverted view of the world in keeping with the nature of the individual, a view such as almost every one holds for a long time, and most people to the end of their lives. If a man analyzes his own character, he will find that it was not until he reached a very ripe age, and in some cases quite unexpectedly, that he was able to rightly and clearly understand many matters of a quite simple nature. If a man analyzes his own character, he will find that it was not until he reached a very ripe age, and in some cases quite unexpectedly, that he was able to rightly and clearly understand many matters of a quite simple nature. Many matters of a quite simple nature. Previously, there had been an obscure point in his knowledge of the world which had arisen through his omitting something in his early education, whether he had been either artificially educated by men or just naturally. Whether he had been either artificially educated by men or just naturally by his own experience. Therefore, one should try to find out the strictly natural course of knowledge, which had arisen through his omitting something in his early education, whether he had been either artificially educated by men or just naturally by his own experience. Therefore, one should try to find out the strictly natural course of knowledge, so that by keeping methodically to its children, may become acquainted with the affairs of the world without getting false ideas into their heads, which frequently cannot be driven out again. In carrying this out, one must next take care that children do not use words with which they connect no clear meaning. Even children have, as a rule, that unhappy tendency of being satisfied with words instead of wishing to understand things, and of learning words by heart so that they may make use of them when they are in a difficulty. This tendency clings to them afterwards, so that the knowledge of many learned men becomes mere verbosity. Wow. Instead of understanding, you are just using the words verbosity. However, the principal thing must always be to let one's observations precede one's ideas. And not the reverse, as is usually and unfortunately the case. Okay, this is very interesting. Like, you need to observe the feeling before you put that into words. You need to understand the feeling before you put that into words. I think that's what is happening over here. And it's very interesting. I think this has happened to me several times, when there is a feeling that you feel after an experience, and you don't know how to put that into words, and then you hear someone who is actually really good at putting that into words, and that just really helps solve that feels like someone has solved this puzzle. Just very interesting. Which may be likened to a child coming into the world with its feet foremost, or a rhyme begin before thinking of its reason. When the child's mind has made a very few observations, one inculcates it with ideas and opinions which are strictly speaking, prejudices. His observations and experience are developed through this ready-made apparatus instead of his ideas being developed out of his own observations. In viewing the world, one sees many things from many sides. Consequently, this is not such a short or quick way of learning as that which makes use of abstract ideas. It quickly comes to a decision about everything. Therefore, preconceived ideas will not be rectified until late. Or it may be they are never rectified. For when a man's view contradicts his ideas, he will reject at the outset what it renders evident as one-sided. Nay, he will deny it and shut his eyes to it, so that his preconceived ideas may remain unaffected. And so it happens that many men go through life full of oddities, caprices, fancies, and prejudices until they finally become fixed ideas. He has never attempted to abstract fundamental ideas from his own observations and experience because he has got everything ready-made from other people. Okay, let's see if this is comfortable. Boom, 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 boom. Okay. Okay. Attempted to abstract fundamental ideas from his own observations and experience because he has got everything ready-made from other people, and it is for this very reason that he and countless others are so insipid and shallow. He has never attempted to abstract fundamental ideas from his own observations and experience because he has got everything ready-made from other people. I think this is also interesting. When you don't actually go and live life, but you just see other people living life. Yeah, very interesting. When you don't go and live out life, but you just watch other people living life. This is exactly what happens when you are you're just consuming second-hand feeling instead of experiencing that feeling for yourself. Because he has got everything ready-made from other people, and it is for this very reason that he and countless others are so insipid and shallow. Instead of such a system, the natural system of education should be employed in educating children. No idea should be impregnated, but what has come through the medium of observations, or at any rate been verified by them. A child would have fewer ideas, but they would be well grounded. No idea should be impregnated, but what has come through the medium of observations, or at any rate been verified by them. A child would have fewer ideas, but they would be well grounded and correct. It will learn to measure things according to its own standard and not according to another's. It would then never acquire 1,000 whims and prejudices, which must be eradicated by the greater part of subsequent experience and education. Its mind would henceforth be accustomed to thoroughness and clearness. The child would rely on its own judgment and be free from prejudices. And in general, children should not get to know life in any aspect whatever from the copy before they have learned it from the original. Instead, therefore, of hastening to place mere books in their hands, one should make them gradually acquainted with things and the circumstances of human life. And above everything, one should take care to guide them to a clear grasp of reality, and to teach them to obtain their ideas directly from the real world and to form them in keeping with it, but not to get them from elsewhere, as from books, fables, and what others have said, and then later to make use of such ready-made ideas in real life. The result will be that their heads are full of chimeras, and that some will have a wrong comprehension of things, and others will fruitlessly endeavor to remodel the world according to those chimeras, and so get on to wrong paths both in theory and practice. For it is incredible how much harm is done by false notions which have been implanted early in life, only to develop later on into prejudices. The later education which we get from the world and real life must be employed in eradicating these early ideas. Diogenes, Laertius, Antisthenes give the following answer. Interrogatus. Whoa, bro, give me this in English. Children should be kept from all kinds of instruction that may make errors possible until their 16th year. That is to say, from philosophy. Should be kept from all kinds of instruction that may make errors possible. That is to say, from philosophy. From philosophy, religion, and general views of every description. From philosophy, religion, and general views of every description, because it is the errors that are acquired in early days or remain as a rule ineradicable. From philosophy, religion, and general views of every description, because it is the errors that are acquired in early days but remain as a rule ineradicable, and because the faculty of judgment is the last to arrive at maturity. They should only be interested in such things that make errors, because it is the errors that are acquired in early days that remain as a rule ineradicable, and because the faculty of judgment is the last to arrive at maturity. They should only be interested in such things that make errors impossible, such as mathematics, and things which are not very dangerous, such as languages, natural science, history, and so forth. Faculty of judgment is the last to arrive at maturity. They should only be interested in such things that make errors impossible. The branches of knowledge which are to be taken up at any age must be within reach of the intellect at that age and perfectly comprehensible to it. Childhood and youth are the time for collecting data and getting to know especially and thoroughly individual and particular things. On the other hand, all judgment of a general nature must at that time be suspended. On the other hand, all judgment of a general nature must at that time be suspended and final explanations left alone. One should leave the faculty of judgment alone, as it only comes with maturity and experience, and also take care that one does not anticipate it by inculcating prejudice, when it will be crippled forever. On the contrary, the memory is to be specially exercised, as it has its greatest strength and tenacity in youth. However, what has to be retained must be chosen with the most careful and scrupulous consideration, for as it is what we have learnt well in our youth that lasts, we should take the greatest possible advantage of this precious gift. If we picture to ourselves how deeply engraven on our memory the people are whom we knew during the first 12 years of our life, and how indelibly imprinted are also the events of that time and most of the things that we then experienced, heard, or learned, the idea of basing education on this susceptibility and tenacity of the youthful mind will seem natural, in that the mind receives its impressions according to a strict method and a regular system. But because the years of youth that are assigned to man are only few, and the capacity for remembering in general is always limited, and still more so the capacity for remembering of the individual, everything depends on the memory being filled with what is most essential and important in any department of knowledge, to the exclusion of everything else. The selection should be made by the most capable minds and masters in every branch of knowledge, after the most mature consideration and the result of it established. Such a selection must be based on a sifting of matters which are necessary and important for a man to know in general, and also for him to know in particular in a particular profession or calling. Knowledge of the first kind would have to be divided into graduated courses, like an encyclopedia corresponding to the degree of general culture which each man has attained in his external circumstances. Would really master the selection in all of its branches. The whole would give a canon specially devised for intellectual education, which naturally would require revision every 10 years. Maturity of knowledge is that state of perfection to which any one individual is able to bring it, when an exact correspondence has been effected between the whole of his abstract ideas and his own personal observations, whereby each of his ideas rests directly or indirectly on a basis of observation which alone gives it any real value, and likewise he is able to place every observation that he makes under the right idea corresponding to it. Maturity of knowledge is the work of experience alone, and consequently of time. For the knowledge we acquire from our own observation is as a rule distinct from that we get through abstract ideas. The former is acquired in the natural way, while the latter comes through good and bad instruction and what other people have told to us. You train your body. When do you make time to train your mind? When do you make time to train your mind? In youth, there is generally little harmony and connection between our ideas, which mere expressions have fixed, and our real knowledge, which has been acquired by observation. Later, they both gradually approach and correct each other. Maturity of knowledge does not exist until they have become quite incorporated. This maturity is quite independent of that other kind of perfection, the standard of which may be high or low. I mean the perfection to which the capacities of an individual may be brought. It is not based on a correspondence between the abstract and intuitive knowledge, but on the degree of intensity of each. The most necessary thing for the practical man is the attainment of an exact and thorough knowledge of what is really going on in the world. But it is also the most irksome, for a man may continue studying until old age without having learned all that is to be learned. While one can master the most necessary thing for the practical man is the attainment of an exact and thorough knowledge of what is really going on in the world. But it is also the most irksome, for a man may continue studying until old age without having learned all that is to be learned, while one can master the most important things in the sciences in one's youth. In getting such a knowledge of the world, it is as a novice that the boy and youth have the first and most difficult lessons to learn. But frequently even the matured man has still much to learn. The study is of considerable difficulty in itself, but it is made doubly difficult by novels, which depict the ways of the world and of men who do not exist in real life. But these are accepted with the credulity of youth and become incorporated with the mind, so that now, in the place of purely negative ignorance, a whole framework of wrong ideas, which are possibly wrong, crops up, subsequently confusing the schooling of experience and representing the lesson it teaches in a false light. Will o' the wisp, and with a girl this is still more frequently the case. They have been deluded into an absolutely false view of life by reading novels and expectations that have been raised that can never be fulfilled. This generally has the most harmful effect on their whole lives. Those men who had neither time nor opportunity to read novels in their youth, such as those who work with their hands, have decided advantage over them. Few of these novels are exempt from reproach. Bad books are intellectual poison. Wow. In the heart of every man lies a wild beast. Reading is thinking with someone else's head. I actually don't know what this means. What does Arthur Schopenhauer mean by this? Many novels give young readers a distorted picture of reality. They fill the mind with images of dramatic romance, heroic destinies, noble characters, perfect love, poetic justice, and meaningful adventures. Then, when the reader enters actual life, reality feels disappointing and confusing because it rarely resembles the story. Will the Wisp. Mysterious light that appears in marshes and lures travelers off the real path. Ignorance is one problem, but false knowledge is worse. They actively mislead you, so instead of entering life with an empty map, you enter with the wrong map. Expectations have been raised that can never be fulfilled. He means expectations about have been raised that can never be fulfilled. Expectations about romantic love, friendship, social status, heroism, happiness, the meaningfulness of everyday life. Reality in his view is much more ordinary, frustrating, and tragic than fiction suggests. The most interesting part is this line. This sounds strange today, but it follows from his theory: the laborer who never read romantic novels may know less literature. About a man who reads too many chivalric romances and becomes unable to distinguish literary fantasy from reality. Too many chivalric romances and becomes unable to distinguish literary fantasy from reality. Stories can create unrealistic expectations. Romantic comedies, social media, self-help books, entrepreneurial success stories often do exactly what he describes. They can make ordinary life seem inadequate. Fiction can also expand perception rather than distort it. Great novels often teach emotional, psychological, and social truths that would take decades to learn through direct experience alone. Not don't read novels. It's closer to don't mistake a model of reality for reality itself. YouTube creator startup mythology has helped grow even AI systems today. Give me key lessons from this article. I would never do that. Knows that the potential exists in you. Know that the potential exists in you. The capacity for anger, jealousy, and cruelty is often safer than the person who believes they are incapable of those emotions. Concept of the shadow. Suffering often seeks an outlet. society depends on a balance of forces: aggression, restraint. The deepest lesson: human beings contain both a beast and a keeper. His final observation is subtle. Anger alone would make us violent. Human beings contain both forces and they partially regulate each other. Courage is fear plus action. Discipline is desire plus restraint. Ambition. Wow. Courage. To be courageous means to be courageous. You only are courageous in the presence of fear. Because only the presence of fear, when you take action, you are courageous. Similarly for discipline, there is a desire which is really strong, but then there is also restraint. That is discipline. Ambition, there is dissatisfaction, and then there is patience. So it has a lot of opposing forces. It is a fact then that in the heart of every man there lies a wild beast which only waits for an opportunity to storm and rage in its desire to inflict pain on others, or if they stand in his way, to kill them. It is this which is the source of all the lust of war and battle. In trying to tame and to some extent hold it in check, the intelligence, its appointed keeper, is always enough to do. People may, if they please, call it the radical evil of human nature, a name which will at least serve those with whom a word stands for an explanation. I say, however, that it is the will to live which, more and more embittered by the constant sufferings of existence, seeks to alleviate its own torment by causing torment in others. There is the will to live which, more and more embittered by the constant sufferings of existence, seeks to alleviate its own torment by causing torment in others. But in this way a man gradually develops in himself real cruelty and malice. The observation may also be added that, as according to Kant, matter subsists only through the antagonism of the powers of expansion and contraction. So human society subsists only by the antagonism of hatred, anger, and fear. For there is a moment in the life of all of us when the malignity of our nature might perhaps make us murderers if it were not accompanied by a due admixture of fear to keep it within bounds. And this fear again would make a man the sport and laughing stock of every boy, if anger were not lying ready in him and keeping watch. This is very interesting. So Nietzsche is very inspired by Schopenhauer because he read Schopenhauer. But I don't know if Schopenhauer got a chance to read Nietzsche. Did Schopenhauer ever get a chance to read the philosophy of Nietzsche? This is a very interesting question, because ideally what you want is, this is like lineage of philosophies. Somebody came up with a philosophy, another person read their philosophy and developed on top their own philosophy, and then somebody again read that, developed their own philosophy. But what is also happening is that the original creators never got an opportunity to debate this new philosophy that was coming out. So it will be very interesting if all these people in this lineage, they got an opportunity to debate with each other on each and every person's philosophy, because by the time there's a new philosophy, the previous person who came with the philosophy just died. No, it was chronologically impossible. Schopenhauer died in 1860 when Nietzsche was just a 15-year-old schoolboy. Then published his first book until 72. The influence ran entirely in the other direction. Nietzsche discovered Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation in a Leipzig bookshop, profoundly affected by it. He even wrote an essay called Schopenhauer as Educator, praising him. Later, though, turned sharply against Schopenhauer's pessimism and denial of the will to live, making him a frequent target of criticism in his mature works. If Schopenhauer was alive to read every text by Nietzsche, what would he say? Okay, this is very interesting. This is very interesting. I'm really curious what happens. He would likely be a mix of flattered, contemptuous, and savagely dismissive, very much in character. On the early Nietzsche, he'd probably be pleased. The birth of tragedy is steeped in Schopenhauerian metaphysics. The Dionysian is essentially his will, dressed in Greek costume. He might grumble that Nietzsche corrupted the analysis with too much Wagner worship, but he would recognize a disciple. On the mature Nietzsche, he would be appalled. The affirmation of life. Schopenhauer's entire system concludes that existence is suffering, and the wise response is denial of the will, resignation, asceticism, compassion. Nietzsche's amor fati and eternal recurrence say, affirm it all, will it again forever. Not as a refutation, but as a failure of nerve dressed up as courage. A man who stared into the same abyss and then chose intoxication over clarity. You'd likely call the Übermensch a juvenile fantasy. The will deluding itself with yet another goal. The rejection of compassion. For Schopenhauer, Mitleid is the foundation of all morality. Nietzsche calls pity a poison that weakens the strong. Schopenhauer would consider this proof that Nietzsche never truly understood the metaphysical unity of all suffering beings, that he remained trapped in the illusion of individuation. Schopenhauer would consider this proof that Nietzsche never truly understood the metaphysical unity of all suffering beings, that he remained trapped in the illusion of individuation. The style prized clarity and despised what he saw as the obscurantist bombast of Hegel and Fichte. Windbaggery was his genre of insult. Thus spoke Zarathustra with its prophetic poetry. This prophetic poetry and aphoristic thunder might strike him as exactly the kind of oracular posturing he spent his life mocking. He would probably say Nietzsche wrote rhapsodies when arguments were required. The madness was not above ad hominem cruelty, and he would almost certainly weaponize Nietzsche's collapse, suggesting the philosophy on intoxicated affirmation, and it exactly where it had to. The madness. Philosophy or intoxicated affirmation, and it exactly where it had to. But here's the irony, he might privately register. Nietzsche took him more seriously than almost anyone else of that era. Deliberate inversion of Schopenhauerian one, who crave recognition and seethes at being ignored, while Hegel filled lecture halls, might find a better satisfaction in being the one opponent Nietzsche could never stop arguing with. Who do you think is right, Nietzsche or Schopenhauer? Okay, let's see whose side Claude takes. So, what is the idea? The Schopenhauer idea is will to live, and Nietzsche is will to power. So Schopenhauer is saying will to live. Humans just want to live, and they will do everything to live. Everything is driven towards living. And Nietzsche is everything is driven toward will to power. We all want to be powerful. We all want to be in this natural state of power. So Schopenhauer, he thinks that humans have a will to live, and what we need to do is avoid that. And that's the reason why he never married. He didn't want to have kids. Nietzsche, on the other hand, is like will to power. So you have will to power means you have to come into your truest form. You have to realize your gifts. You have to. Wow, the people are out. I'll give you an honest read, and with the caveat, the writer is doing a lot of work in a debate about the value of existence. Schopenhauer wins on diagnosis, and Nietzsche wins on response. Schopenhauer's account of the human condition is uncomfortably accurate in places. The treadmill structure of desire, wanting, briefly getting. Schopenhauer's account of the human condition is uncomfortably accurate in places. Schopenhauer's account of the human condition is uncomfortably accurate in places. The treadmill structure of desire, wanting, briefly getting, then boredom or new wanting. Anticipated hedonic adaptation research by 150 years. His insight that we are driven by forces beneath rational awareness, prefigured psychoanalysis, and much of modern psychology is a description of how striving creatures experience the world. He's hard to dismiss, but his prescription doesn't follow from his diagnosis. Even granting that life involves pervasive suffering, the leap to therefore existence should be denied, smuggles in an assumption that suffering is the only thing that counts in the ledger. He never adequately answers why meaning, beauty, love, or absorption in work can outweigh pain. He just asserts the asymmetry. And there's a performative problem. Schopenhauer himself ate well, played the flute daily, defended his property fiercely, and lived to 72. The life denied very little. From some neutral vantage point, because the valuation itself is an expression of the life doing the valuing. Strikes me as a real philosophical advance, not just a temperamental difference. His point that Schopenhauer's pessimism is itself a symptom, a stance taken by a particular kind of will, is generally hard to escape. What Nietzsche loses me is the whole demolition and compassion. Schopenhauer's moral philosophy that ethics is grounded in recognizing the suffering of others as continuous with your own has aged far better than Nietzsche's flirtations with cruelty as sign of health. You can affirm life without sneering at pity, and Nietzsche's insistence otherwise seems like overcorrection. Would argue his critique of pity is subtler. Wow, cool. Really cool. Alright.